Okay, looks good. Well, hello everyone. I'm Andy, and I'm here with Counselor Amanda today. We are going to
Hello.
be answering some mental health questions that we either get from campers or that we've gotten from students, clients, kind of common questions that you may be having about mental health. Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm Amanda. I've been with Camp Quest as a counselor for several years. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and I work in hospital mental health, but I am not a therapist or a doctor, so none of the things that I'm about to say should be used to diagnose or offer specific advice to your situation. All of this is just general information that you can easily find on the internet.
Mhm. And our blog post for this video will also have links to a lot of really great mental health resources, things for how to find someone if you need to see a therapist, a doctor, helplines, support groups, all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, we'll get started here with some common questions that we'd love to talk about that teenagers and young adults tend to deal with these kind of days. So the first question we got was just kind of a general, what's the difference between depression and anxiety? Are they normal? Is my something wrong with my brain? That kind of thing. Let's start with what's the difference between depression and anxiety?
Well, these are very normal, and what can kind of be hard sometimes is to know when you're crossing between like fear or sadness to depression and anxiety. So generally depression is, well, and anxiety both, they have to do with the serotonin in your brain, so it is a chemical imbalance, and it doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It just means that, your brain's processing things a little bit differently. Um, Depression is, hopelessness, or believing that it's just not worth it, or feeling that you're not worth it, or, obsessing about things that are kind of scary. And anxiety is worrying a lot, having uncontrollable racing thoughts, really avoiding things that would otherwise bring you pleasure, also obsessing about scary situations. So there is some overlap between them, but in general, depression is kind of an overabundance of sadness and hopelessness, and anxiety is an overabundance of fear and worry.
Gotcha. I guess what's maybe like the difference between something hard happened in life, like maybe someone in my family passed away and I feel really sad about that for a long time. When does someone kind of transition between I'm sad for a period of time versus I'm depressed? Can you help me kind of
Yeah, that's
do
such
that?
a good question. And there's no real easy answer to that because it depends from person to person. But the first thing I should note is having really strong emotions after an event is really normal. It doesn't mean that something's wrong with you. It doesn't mean that, you're not processing things how you should. And everyone approaches things differently. So, if if myself and my sister both have a family member pass away and I am coping and going through life and my sister is not, that's just a difference between two people. Like, it doesn't really mean that I'm better or worse than my sister with that. Now, when that turns into something a little more, when it potentially crosses that line between a normal response. And I should clarify quickly, when we say normal, this is talking about like in a large group of people, just kind of what the average response would be. It, normal doesn't mean better or worse. But when a response crosses from like a normal response to a more depressive or anxiety response, is kind of has to do with the timing. When those feelings are really sticking around, and no matter what you do, they're really not going away, this might be a good time to start thinking about talking with a doctor about that. Um, and, sometimes this can happen not related to an event, especially for teenagers. Just the fact that your hormones are changing in your body can sometimes bring about depression and anxiety where you may not have had it before. So, just some general good recommendations of when you should really think about seeking help from a doctor or a therapist is, if you're feeling this way all the time, if you don't enjoy things that you used to, um, if you are feeling like really weighty guilt or helplessness or worry, if you're thinking about death or self-harm, that's absolutely a time that you should reach out for help. If your sleep is changing a lot, if you suddenly are finding that you're sleeping a lot or you're not sleeping enough, or the sleep you're getting doesn't feel very high quality, if you're tired all the time, if you cry a lot, and crying is a totally healthy response to things, but like if you are crying to the point where it's really noticeable to yourself, that might be another sign that you should look for help. If you are having trouble concentrating or remembering, and sometimes this can be expressed just in your body more so than in your mind. So like if you're suddenly feeling like my body's really sore all the time, or I'm getting a lot of headaches, or like I'm getting a lot of stomach aches, that can be a sign that, something's off. And it may be mental health, it may be physical health, but it's definitely worth the conversation with your doctor. So, just general things like that. Like if you're noticing this change, or you're noticing that's really affecting your life.
Mm-hmm. You brought up an interesting point. Depression, it sounds like maybe doesn't have to follow some really sad event. Is this a true statement, would you say?
Absolutely.
Can just anyone get depression? Does something have to happen to them to develop it?
Anyone can get depression. Sometimes it is from an event, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it happens suddenly, sometimes it happens over time, sometimes it lasts a short period of time, sometimes it really sticks around, and that just varies from person to person.
Gotcha. We got kind of a lot of similar questions that were like this of, hey, if I'm feeling depressed or anxious, how do I tell my parents? How do I start that conversation? How do I express my feelings so that they can understand what I'm trying to tell them? And what happens if they don't get it, or they won't listen to me? This is a big thing.
Yeah.
I realize if I'm not feeling my normal self, how do I start that conversation with my parents?
In my work with children's mental health, this is probably one of the most common questions I get. And it's really understandable. These are people who support you in your life, and they want the best for you. And it can be really challenging and really scary to tell them, like, hey, I'm not doing okay. But it's such an important conversation to have because it can start the ball rolling, and it can really help you sort out what's going on with yourself and whether this is something that you should seek more help for, or, you know, if there's something you guys can work through together. So yeah, like this is definitely something that you should do if you're feeling like you're not yourself. Excuse me. So, you know, things that I usually recommend is sometimes it can really help to write it down ahead of time,
Mhm.
whether you're doing it as a journal or like a practice conversation. If you have people around you who kind of know what's going on, like maybe your friends or teammates, you can ask them if they'd be willing to help you practice
Mm,
this.
that's a good idea.
And once you kind of have an idea of what you would like to say, a really good approach is find a time that's really neutral. So if there's a room in your house where everything's always happening and it's really busy, maybe go to a different room.
Mm.
If you're really nervous and like really stressing out, for that initial conversation, it might be helpful to find a time where you're a little bit less stressed. That might make it easier for you to have the conversation you need to have. And that goes both ways. You know, if your parent has had a really hard day at work and maybe they might not be in a great space to hear what you're about to say, you know, so just understanding that they're human too. And one of the best things you can do is just ask them. Say, like, hey, I really need to talk to you about something. When would be a good time? And they can kind of help you work with that.
Gotcha. So kind of following up on that, say, you know, I do tell my parents that I think, you know, I think I might be depressed. And my parents or my guardians or whoever kind of, I don't know, if they kind of brush me off and say, you know, it's just a phase, or, you know, you'll be okay. What, you know, what should I do? What are my options?
That is such a tough position to be in because we really want our parents to be supportive for us. And but sometimes what we need and what they think we need are different. So if they're really not responding, and I would give it a couple tries, you know, just approach them maybe in different ways, or if you feel like it didn't go well the first time, write it down, figure out kind of how to reset and try again. But there is a big stigma around these kind of things. Sometimes people just don't want to admit that their loved one might be having a problem, or that their loved one might need help. And so if you're in that situation where you really feel like you're just not being heard how you need to be heard, find another trusted adult. So a teacher, a coach, a spiritual leader, a mentor, someone else that you can voice your concerns to.
Mm.
And you can go about it the same way, you know, write it down, prepare, ask them when it's a good time, but try to reach out to a couple people and express your concerns. And they might be able to point you to some resources, and especially if they know you well, um, they might be able to help be like an in between you and your parents or guardians. So just finding other adults that you can go to can be really helpful. And
Mm.
if you're feeling like you don't really know who that might be, there are some really great resources on the internet as to, like, you know, people you can reach out to and just kind of discuss what's going on, and they might be able to provide some strategies as well.
Yeah, for sure. I know we will have some links to accompany this video for specifically for some youth, teenage resources for people you can reach out to. So that's always good. And I imagine if, you know, if my parents or guardians kind of brush off what I say the first time, if I talk to them a few times about it, maybe that might kind of help sink in maybe to them over time that it's not going away. Would you say that's a pretty fair statement?
Yeah, that can definitely be a big help. You know, a lot of times just the shock of hearing something you weren't expecting, or just not knowing how to respond in the moment, might put up some barriers and some resistance. But if you're really expressing over time, and this is not just with mental health, this is really with anything that's important to you, you know, the more you express it, the more people can realize, like, oh, this is something that really matters to them.
Mm-hmm. Um, if I, you know, if I want to tell my parents, I want to seek, you know, medical help. How do I tell them that without maybe freaking them out? You know, if I'm in a place where I don't feel like I'm, you know, want to hurt myself or anything, but I do want my parents to be like, hey, I want to go to a doctor, get an opinion. You know, how do I approach that situation too with my parents, or how do I ask? Do I just say, take me to the doctor, or
So there are kind of two things here.
yeah.
The first thing, if you feel like you are needing to hurt yourself, you need to tell somebody. And it might freak them out, but they, like, that's, your safety and your health are way more important. So if you are feeling like you need to harm yourself, or you are thinking about suicide, please reach out for help immediately. You know, you don't have to wait for the right moment. If it's more general, like if you're just, hey, like, I've really been having some issues with anxiety, or I'm really having issues with depression, or just my world just doesn't feel right, uh, you know, approaching it slowly can sometimes help. And a question I really like to ask is, hey, are you in a good place where I can share something that might be disturbing? You know, because you don't know what's going on in someone else's life or in someone else's brain. But by asking that, it kind of paves the way for them to accept information that might be a little bit hard for them to take in, you know, or just, this is where writing it down can really be helpful, because it that can give them some time to process it as well as you.
Hmm. Gotcha. It's pretty good. Let's see. You know, kind of in the same vein, we're kind of talking about people we can trust or go to. What if I'm the person that one of my friends goes to, and I'm worried about how they're doing, you know, mentally, or I think my friend might want to harm themselves. You know, what should I do if someone comes to me and are telling me all these really hard um, facts, or you know, experiences that my friends are going through?
So the first thing on this is, sometimes your friends might not be able or willing to come forward to you about this. So I'm first just going to talk about some general things you might notice with your friends, and then we'll talk about, like, what are some of the things to do from that. So if you are noticing that your friend is appears more sad or worried, if they are expressing that they're not very hopeful about the future, if they are feeling guilty or empty or like they're not worth anything, if they suddenly start canceling on plans a lot, if they are getting really upset or they're lashing out, if their level of energy changes, where suddenly they're moving a lot more slowly, or they're like really all over the place, if they're kind of becoming less hygienic, if you notice that their hair isn't brushed or they are having more bad
Like
breath.
take care of themselves.
Yeah, if they're not taking care of themselves, if they seem really tired all the time, if they're eating more or less than you have seen them do, or if they're really having trouble concentrating, if they're talking about death or suicide, or if they're talking about giving away their possessions. These are all warning signs that you might want to have a conversation with mental health about them, or about mental health with them. So one of the most important things and helpful things you can do is just listen. Sometimes people just really need someone to talk to, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they have an issue with their mental health. They might just be going through some stuff. So try to listen, ask questions, validate them, say like, hey, yeah, what you're going through, it sounds like it really sucks. Show empathy, like really listen, but try to not fix it. And that can be so hard, but there are people whose job it is to fix it, and it's not up to you to take someone else's struggles and make them your own, because that can just make it really hard on you. So listen, but like if you feel like, hey, this is getting to the point where you might need some help, then point them to some resources rather than trying to solve it yourself. And the resources that Andy's going to post at the end of this video might be some really good things to share with your friends. And I'll be sending some to Andy as well to add to that list. So just encouraging them, like, hey, it sounds like you have a lot going on. Here's some things you might want to look into. That can be really helpful, because again, then you're not trying to take their burdens on yourself, but you're offering them resources. And really encourage them. If you have a friend who says like, hey, like I really feel like I need this, but I'm struggling to get to a point where I feel comfortable doing that, you can always offer to do it with them. I've had a couple friends who approach me and they're like, hey, I'm experiencing such and such, and I feel like I should maybe have therapy, but it's kind of scary. And I'll say like, hey, why don't I drive you to the therapy clinic, and I'll sit in the waiting room while you make your appointment, and I won't listen to any of your personal details, but I'll be there and I can help you get through this.
That's something where, can I offer to my friend if they, feel comfortable talking to their parents, maybe I just be there with them as well. Maybe I tell their parents that I've noticed a change in my friend as well. So it's not just them, it's another supporter or another person outside looking in.
That's such a great idea, and that goes beyond just parents. You can, when I mentioned earlier about reaching out to a trusted adult, that's something you can do for yourself and for others. Like if you notice that your classmate is having some of these changes that are concerning, maybe telling your teacher, just being like, hey, I'm kind of worried about them.
Yeah, that seems good.
Yeah, so a couple other things you can do when you have a friend in crisis. I already mentioned, like, you shouldn't take their burdens on you, and I'm just going to really reiterate that, like, set boundaries with people and say like, hey, I'm here for you, I'm here to support you, but I'm your friend, I'm not your therapist. And so I'm here to listen, but like sometimes this might be a bit too much for me. And so you need,
I'm not a professional myself, but
right. Yeah. So
someone
it's,
else
you
is
just
out
need to
there.
like be
Mhm.
clear to your friends that like this is where my line is, and that line can change. Like that's okay. You may have initially been like, oh yeah, I can listen to this, and then you start listening and be like, woof, this is a lot. Like I can't hear more. That's okay. Like just really be honest with them about what you need, and then just kind of educate yourself about what this stuff is. You know, you can do searches online for depression and anxiety and how to help a depressed friend, and really learn about this on your own so that you kind of have a basis of where they're coming from.
Mm, sounds good. See, I'm gonna pause my recording just for a moment because I'm getting a low battery signal on my laptop. We'll pause and resume in just a moment.